It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when grocery stores turn into battle arenas of shopping carts and discount hunters. The automatic doors slid open, and in swept Goldie Karen. At 32, she carried herself with the air of someone convinced the world was secretly her stage. Tall, toned, and radiant in her casual denim jacket, her wavy blonde hair bounced as if it had its own dramatic soundtrack. Karen had only one mission that day: to secure the last bag of organic kale chips. She had been thinking about them all week, practically dreaming of their salty crunch. And there it was, sitting lonely on the shelf, a prize glistening under harsh fluorescent lights. She quickened her pace, eyes locked on the target. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. Another shopper, moving just as quickly, reached out at the exact same moment. Their hands hovered near the bag, almost touching. Karen froze, her piercing blue eyes narrowing with theatrical intensity. "Excuse me," she said with the weight of royalty defending her throne. "That's not just a snack. That is destiny." The shopper chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off. "Relax, it's just chips. Calm down." 2 simple words. But to Goldie Karen, they were nothing short of a declaration of war. Her hand retracted slowly, like a heroine in the opening act of a tragedy. She removed her sunglasses with exaggerated precision, revealing eyes blazing with mock fury. Around her, the world seemed to pause. A child dropped a toy. A cartwheel squeaked in suspense. Even the air itself felt heavier. "Calm down?" she repeated, her voice low and dangerous, as though the very phrase had fractured the universe. The shopper blinked, unsettled, but Karen leaned closer, her tone now dripping with mischief. "Darling, I don't calm down. I escalate." In that instant, something shifted. She stood taller, chin high, her entire presence magnified. It was as if a switch had been flipped, activating a side of her that lived for spectacle. Strangers began to notice. Heads turned. Phones were discreetly lifted to record. Karen had not only found herself in conflict, she had found an audience, and Goldie Karen adored an audience. Clutching the bag of kale chips against her chest as if it were a relic of untold power, she turned toward the small gathering of onlookers. A sly smile curved her lips. This wasn't just about groceries anymore. It was about principle, about performance, about refusing to let anyone, especially some random stranger, tell her how to exist. At that moment, in the middle of aisle 7, Goldie Karen transformed from shopper to spectacle. She wasn't merely a woman defending her snack. She was a supervillain being born before their very eyes. And none of them were ready for what came next. A hush fell over aisle 7 as Goldie Karen took her place in front of the gathering crowd. She stood like a stage performer, one foot slightly forward, her hand clutching the kale chips dramatically against her chest. Her eyes scanned the audience. Shoppers frozen mid-step, a cashier craning their neck, even a teenager aiming a phone camera at her as though capturing history. Karen thrived on moments like these. To her, this wasn't embarrassment. This was theater. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice sharp but strangely magnetic, "you have just witnessed an act of disrespect." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is this about chips?" But Karen raised a finger as though silencing a parliament. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and launched into what would soon be known as her villain speech. "Imagine," she said, pacing slowly in front of the shelves, "walking into a store with hope in your heart. You search, you strive, and at last, you find it. The final treasure. The prize waiting just for you." She lifted the kale chips high above her head, as though presenting a relic of ancient power. But then, she paused dramatically, her blue eyes widening. "Someone dares to tell you to calm down." "Calm down!" Her words echoed in the silence. The shopper who had originally reached for the chips shuffled uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't mean—" Karen spun toward him, pointing an accusatory finger. "Oh, but you did mean it! Do you think I'm the kind of woman who simply calms down? No, I rise, I resist. I reclaim." The crowd reacted. Some snickered. Others whispered. But many, strangely enough, leaned in, caught by the sheer ridiculous conviction in her voice. She lowered the chips to chest level, her tone softening as if she were letting the crowd in on a secret. "Calm down is the enemy of passion. Calm down is what villains say to heroes before crushing their dreams. And my dreams, dear people, are gluten-free and lightly salted." The line drew an actual laugh from somewhere in the back. Even the cashier couldn't hide a grin. Karen smirked, satisfied with the reaction. "So no, I will not calm down. Today, I take my stand, not just for myself, but for every soul who has ever been silenced by those cursed words. Today," she raised the chips once more, "I embrace my destiny." By the time she finished, she wasn't just holding a bag of snacks. She was holding her crown. The audience applauded. Not all of them, but enough. And for Goldie Karen, that was victory. What no one knew was that this performance was only the beginning. The grocery store had just witnessed the birth of a legend, and legends rarely stop at one speech. For a moment, aisle 7 was alive with applause and laughter, the kind that comes from a crowd caught off guard by something so bizarre they can't help but enjoy it. Goldie Karen soaked it in, bowing slightly, her wavy blonde hair falling around her face like the curtain call of a Broadway star. But then, the tide shifted. "Okay, but seriously," muttered one shopper near the juice aisle. "It's just chips. Can we wrap this up?" The words cut through the atmosphere like a pin popping a balloon. Karen's blue eyes darted toward the speaker, her posture stiffening. The crowd murmured, torn between amusement and impatience. Some had started recording her, but others were growing restless. Karen, however, was not about to lose her stage. She stepped forward with deliberate grace, her voice carrying across the store. "Just chips?" she echoed, as though the phrase itself was offensive. "Just chips?" Her hand flew to her chest as if wounded. "Would you say Shakespeare was just a playwright? Would you say Beethoven was just a piano player?" She gestured to the kale chips, holding them up like a priceless artifact. "This is art. This is history. This is my moment. Do not reduce it to just anything." The original shopper, the one who'd reached for the chips, sighed and muttered, "Lady, you're insane." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's head snapped toward him like a predator sensing weakness. Her lips curved into a slow, wicked smile. "Insane?" she said softly, dangerously. "Oh, darling, you have no idea." She began pacing in a small circle, her tone rising. "They call me dramatic. They call me extra. But I call it commitment. While the rest of you shuffle through life quietly, I bring fire, flair, and fury." Her voice cracked with theatrical passion. "You might hate me, but you will never forget me." That line landed. People exchanged glances. Some laughed. Others clapped again. Ironically or not, it didn't matter. Karen treated it as a standing ovation. But then, from the back, a teenager called out, "You're literally fighting over kale chips." "Calm down!" It was like throwing gasoline on open flames. Karen froze, her eyes snapping toward the voice. Slowly, she lifted her head, scanning the crowd with mock menace. "Another one dares?" she whispered. The bystanders chuckled nervously. Phones tilted higher, recording every second. Karen, however, leaned fully into the theatrics. She raised the kale chips high, her tone booming like a declaration of war. "If you want calm, go find it in the frozen food section. But here, in aisle 7, you will find only chaos." The crowd erupted, half laughing, half cheering. Someone shouted, "Speech! Speech!" And Karen? She had never looked prouder. She was no longer just shopping. She was leading a movement. Little did the crowd know, this movement was about to spiral even further. The energy in aisle 7 was reaching dangerous levels. The crowd had grown. Moms with half-filled carts, teens live streaming on their phones. Even a man from the dairy section leaning against a fridge door, munching on an apple like he'd bought front-row tickets. Goldie Karen stood in the center of it all, kale chips held aloft like a queen's scepter. But every reign has its challenger. A figure appeared at the edge of the aisle, a weary store employee in a red vest, badge slightly crooked, walkie-talkie crackling at his hip. His name tag read, "Mark," though he looked more like the embodiment of, "I do not get paid enough for this." Mark cleared his throat, voice flat. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to calm down." The crowd gasped collectively. He'd said the forbidden words. Karen's head turned slowly, her blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. Her eyes locked onto him like a hawk sighting prey. The store went silent again, so silent that you could hear the soft hum of the freezer units. "Calm down?" she repeated, almost in a whisper. Then with a sudden flourish, she raised her free hand to the ceiling. "Why does everyone insist on those cursed words today?" Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. "Look, it's just a bag of chips. Either buy it or—" Karen cut him off, stepping forward with commanding authority. "Just a bag of chips?" she thundered. "No, Mark, this is not a snack, it is a symbol. A beacon of hope. A story future generations will tell." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Someone yelled, "Preach!" Another shouted, "Villain arc unlocked!" Mark, however, was unmoved. "Ma'am, if you don't settle down, I'll have to call security." The words only fueled her further. Her smirk widened, her voice dropping into the kind of tone villains use right before the climactic battle. "Security?" she purred. "Ah, yes. Call in your reinforcements. Summon your armies. But know this, I will not yield. Not today. Not while destiny rests in my hands." She held the kale chips higher, triumphant, as though she had already won. Phones caught every moment. The crowd was split between those who thought they were witnessing comedy gold and those half-convinced Karen might actually be dangerous. Mark sighed, muttering, "Unbelievable," and reached for his walkie-talkie. But before he could speak into it, Karen struck again. not physically but verbally. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with theatrical menace. "You may control these aisles, Mark, but you will never control me." The crowd roared. Even Mark froze, unsure if he'd just been outperformed in his own workplace. Goldie Karen basked in the chaos, her blue eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She wasn't leaving quietly. No, she was building towards something even bigger, and Aisle 7 hadn't seen the worst of her yet. The air in Aisle 7 felt charged, like the pause before a thunderclap. Shoppers leaned forward in suspense, phones raised high. Mark, the weary employee, still clutched his walkie-talkie, caught between duty and disbelief. And in the middle of it all, Goldie Karen stood tall, kale chips raised like the crown jewels of chaos. Her deep blue eyes scanned the crowd. She could feel it, the tension, the curiosity, the thrill of having an audience wrapped around her little finger. This wasn't just about chips anymore. It was about legacy. Karen took a deliberate step forward, her voice lowering into a dramatic hush. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may think you've witnessed a tantrum. You may call me ridiculous, theatrical, even unhinged." She paused, letting her words hang heavy in the air. "But you will remember me. Oh yes, you will always remember me," the crowd murmured. Even the teens stopped giggling, sensing that Karen was building toward something. She extended the kale chips above her head with both hands, as if offering them to the heavens. "This," her voice rang out, echoing through the shelves, "is not about food. It's about principle. It's about standing tall when the world tries to shrink you. It's about refusing to calm down when calmness is nothing but surrender." The words, absurd as they were, landed with unexpected weight. A few people actually clapped. Someone whistled. Mark muttered something about quitting. Then Karen struck her final blow. She tilted her chin high, hair shimmering under the fluorescent lights, and declared, "Today I walked in for groceries, but I walk out a legend." And with that she spun on her heel, an elegant, almost balletic turn, and strode toward the checkout. Each step echoed with the confidence of a supervillain, leaving her lair after declaring war. The crowd parted instinctively, like extras in a movie who knew not to block the star. At the register, Karen didn't just place the chips on the counter. She laid them down slowly, ceremoniously, as though they were priceless treasure. The cashier, suppressing laughter, scanned the bag with a beep that felt almost anticlimactic. Karen accepted her receipt with regal grace, lifted her head high, and swept through the automatic doors. For a moment, everyone inside stood frozen, staring after her. Then the store erupted in noise, laughter, clapping, endless chatter. The teens shouted, "That was epic!" A mother muttered, "I'll be telling this story at dinner." Even Mark, shaking his head, admitted quietly, "She's unforgettable." And outside, under the gray afternoon sky, Goldie Karen adjusted her sunglasses, tucked the kale chips under her arm, and smirked. The world saw her as dramatic, ridiculous, maybe even outrageous. But to her, she wasn't just Goldie Karen anymore. She was a legend. And if you survived Goldie Karen's villain arc in Aisle 7, smash that like button before she claims the next snack shelf as her empire. Don't forget to comment your favorite Karen moment below. And of course, subscribe for more legendary drama, or else Goldie Karen might just make you her next rival.